The jungle of Vera Prime was alive with the hiss of strange creatures and the hum of glowing insects. Thick vines wrapped around ancient trees, their roots curling like the claws of a beast waiting to strike. Shari moved through the mist without a sound, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow. She was the apex predator here, the ruler of this hunting ground. For years, nothing had escaped her pursuit, and nothing had dared to hunt her in return. Her people believed no other warrior could match her. She had slain armored beasts with a single strike and crushed armored invaders under her claws. Every scar on her armor was a mark of victory, not defeat. Today was meant to be another routine hunt, but the air felt different. There was a strange scent in the wind, sharp and foreign. Unlike any prey she had known, she slowed her steps, every muscle tight. The leaves shifted overhead, but no creature revealed itself. The silence was heavy, pressing on her ears. She clicked her tongue to call her tracking drone, but the signal was weak. Something was interfering with her tech, and that alone was enough to make her wary. Vera Prime's predators were clever, but none had ever disrupted her systems before. Then she saw it, a shape standing still in the fog ahead. Broad shoulders, tall frame, bare skin marked with strange dark lines. The figure was unarmed, or at least appeared to be. He stood without fear, his gaze locked on her as if daring her to move first. Shari felt a spark of annoyance. No prey had ever looked at her that way. She stepped forward, letting the light catch her black battle armor. Metallic plates gleamed as the orange glow of her hair spilled over her shoulders. She expected the figure to step back, to show fear. Instead, the human stepped forward. His movement was calm, measured, like a predator that knew it could not be beaten. It was the first time Shari wondered if she was looking at prey at all. The human spoke in a deep, steady voice, his words foreign yet clear through her translator. He asked why she was hunting in this sector, a question that made her pause. No prey had ever spoken to her like that. She told him this was her territory, and anything that entered was hers to claim. His only answer was a small, knowing smile. That unsettled her more than any battle cry. A sudden movement in the trees broke the moment. One of Vera Prime's true beasts lunged from the shadows, its fanged maw wide. Shari reacted instantly, her blade flashing in a silver arc. But the human was faster. Before her strike landed, he moved with impossible speed, driving the short, curved weapon into the beast's neck. The creature collapsed at his feet before Shari could finish her swing. She stared at him, her heart pounding. The strike had been perfect, fast, precise, lethal. The kind of kill that took years to master. She had fought alongside elite warriors, but none had moved like this. The human wiped his blade clean on the beast's hide, then looked up at her again without a word. In that moment, Shari felt something she had not felt since her first hunt uncertainty. They stood in silence, the mist curling between them. Shari realized she had underestimated him. This was not some lost traveler who had stumbled into her domain. This was a hunter, maybe even more skilled than she was. And for the first time in years, she wondered if she might be the one being hunted. Shari followed the human as he walked deeper into the mist. She did not know why she moved after him instead of leaving. Something about his calm movements and steady breathing made her curious. He did not move like prey, yet he did not move like the soldiers she had fought before. It was as if he belonged in this dangerous place more than she did. The human stopped near a fallen tree. He knelt down, inspecting tracks in the wet soil. Shari recognized the prints, Vera Prime's shadow beasts. They hunted in packs, using the fog to hide until they struck. She watched him run his fingers along the edges of the prints, as if reading the story only he could understand. When he looked up, his eyes met hers, and he simply said that they were being followed. Shari's hand went to the hilt of her blade. She scanned the trees, listening for the sound of claws on bark. She could not hear them, but she knew the human spoke the truth. The air had that charged stillness that came before a hunt. She expected him to draw a long weapon or call for backup. Instead, he picked up a short spear he had fashioned from a broken branch and a piece of metal. It was crude but balanced perfectly in his grip. They moved together through the forest, each step measured and silent. Shari was surprised at how easily he matched her pace. Most off-worlders struggled with Vera Prime's uneven ground and heavy air. This man seemed to glide across it, his boots barely disturbing the moss underfoot. For a moment, she forgot that she had once thought of him as prey. She began to think of him as a fellow predator. A low growl echoed through the mist. Shari. And the human froze at the same time. Shapes moved in the fog, dark, sleek bodies with glowing eyes. The pack had surrounded them without a sound. The human did not speak, but his eyes flicked to her left, then to her right. It was a silent command to take the flank while he handled the front. She had never taken orders from anyone outside her clan, but this time she obeyed without thinking. The first beast lunged toward her. She twisted aside and slashed, her blade cutting through thick hide. Another came from behind, and she spun, driving her armored elbow into its jaw. She heard a sharp whistle and turned in time to see the human drive his spear clean through a beast's throat. He moved with frightening precision, each strike quick and final. She realized he was not just fighting to survive, he was controlling the battle. The last of the beasts fell with a choking snarl. Shari stood breathing hard, her armor scratched but intact. The human's bare chest was streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes were calm. He tossed the broken spear aside and began pulling fangs from the fallen beasts. When she asked why, he told her they were proof of the kill, trophies that carried weight among warriors. She had collected many such trophies herself, but his manner suggested this was more than pride. It was ritual. They rested by a small stream, the fog finally thinning enough for the sun to reach the ground. Shari steadied him as he drank. His scars were old, not from wild beasts but from weapons. She asked him where he had learned to fight like that. He did not give a place or a name. He only said that where he came from, surviving meant becoming the deadliest thing in the wild. For the first time, she understood that she was not the only one who had been shaped by a deadly world. The sound of rushing water masked the faint. At first, Shari's ears twitched as she picked it up. The human noticed too and stood, scanning the tree line. A drone emerged from the mist, its black shell gleaming. It was not hers, and the markings were foreign. Shari felt her stomach tighten. Whoever sent that drone would not be friendly to either of them. The drone hovered just above the ground, its sensors glowing a cold blue. Shari stepped in front of the human, her blade ready, while his hand moved to the knife at his side. Neither of them knew who controlled the machine, but both understood. It was watching. The drone made a sharp clicking sound, scanning them from head to toe. Then it projected a red light over their position, marking them like prey. Shari's instinct screamed to destroy it, but the human lifted his hand and shook his head. He moved slowly toward the machine, keeping his eyes locked on it. The drone shifted back slightly, adjusting its sensors as if confused by his approach. In a sudden movement, he leapt forward, grabbed the drone's lower frame, and smashed it against a tree. Sparks burst in the air, and the device fell silent. Shari could only stare as the smoking shell hit the ground. She asked him how he knew. The drone would not explode. He answered that he didn't know for sure, but trusted that its operator needed it for surveillance, not attack. His confidence made her uneasy and impressed at the same time. She realized he took risks not for glory, but because his mind worked differently from most warriors she knew. In her world, hesitation could kill. In his world, bold action decided who lived. The forest fell quiet again, but the tension had not eased. If the drone had found them, its owner would be nearby. Shari suggested they move, but the human was already ahead of her, scanning the terrain for higher ground. They climbed a ridge thick with twisted roots, each step bringing them above the mist. The air here was cooler, the light sharper. From the top, they could see movement in the distance, figures in dark armor cutting through the trees. Shari recognized the armor instantly. It belonged to the Karak raiders, mercenaries who hunted for profit, not survival. They would take her as a trophy and the human as a curiosity to sell. Her grip tightened on her blade. She expected him to suggest an ambush, but instead, he told her they would keep moving and choose their ground carefully. She wanted to fight immediately, yet something in his voice made her wait. They found a narrow ravine with high walls on each side. The human explained that the raiders would have to enter single file if they followed. He began setting traps using vines, sharpened sticks, and stones. Shari had never seen such simple tools used for war, yet the design was clever. Each trap was silent and deadly, meant to slow and confuse the enemy. She began to wonder how many battles he had fought before meeting her. By the time the first raider reached the ravine, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the forest floor. A thin wire of vine caught the lead soldier's leg, sending him crashing into a pit lined with sharpened spikes. The others hesitated, giving the human time to strike from above. He dropped down like a shadow, his knife flashing once before, disappearing into the next movement. Shari joined the fight, her blade cutting through the narrow path like a storm. The battle was short but brutal. The raiders were skilled, but the traps broke their formation and their courage. Soon, only one remained, fleeing back through the trees. The human made no move to chase him. When Shari asked why, he said the survivor would carry fear back to his masters, a weapon stronger than any blade. She had heard such words from veteran commanders, but never from someone who fought like a lone hunter. As they gathered what little supplies the raiders carried, the human glanced toward the horizon. Smoke was rising from a point deep in the forest. Shari frowned, recognizing the direction. That was near the place where her clan kept their outer camps. If the raiders had been this close, her people were in danger. She looked at him, and without a word, they began moving toward the smoke. The forest floor grew darker as they moved toward the smoke. Shari could feel the tension building in her chest. Every step reminded her that her clan might already be under attack. The human kept a steady pace, his eyes scanning the tree line for movement. He moved without fear, yet every motion showed he was ready for danger. She began to trust his presence beside her more than she expected. When they reached the ridge above the camp, Shari froze. The outer huts were burning, their walls collapsing under the heat. Figures in Karak armor moved between the flames, dragging captives and searching for valuables. Shari's grip tightened on her blade, but the human placed a hand on her arm. He pointed toward a path on the far side of the camp. It was less guarded, and from there they could strike without being seen. They moved like shadows through the smoke. The human steps made no sound even on the dry leaves. Shari realized he had been trained for this kind of approach. She was used to direct combat, charging through enemies with speed and strength. Yet his way was quieter, colder, and far more dangerous. By the time they reached the far edge of the camp, 2 guards were already down, their bodies hidden in the grass. A sudden scream broke through the noise of crackling fire. Shari's eyes darted to the center of the camp, where a young warrior from her clan struggled against a raider's grip. Without hesitation, she leapt forward, her blade flashing in the smoke. The human was already moving beside her, his knife finding the weak point in a raider's armor. They fought side by side, each movement covering the others. It was the first time she felt their skills truly merging in battle. The fight spread through the camp like wildfire. Raiders shouted orders, but the smoke made it hard to see. The human used it to his advantage, striking fast and disappearing into the haze. Shari cut a path toward the prisoners, her armor deflecting blows as she pushed forward. When they reached the captives, the human cut their bindings with quick, precise motions. The freed warriors took up fallen weapons and joined the fight. Within minutes, the battle turned. The raiders, now outnumbered and disoriented, began to retreat. Shari pursued one of their leaders, her rage burning hotter than the fires around them. But just as she was about to strike him down, the human's voice called her back. She turned to see him standing over a wounded raider, holding him by the armor. The man was still alive, and the human was questioning him about their base. Shari hesitated, then returned to listen. The raider spat out his answer after a hard strike from the human's fist. Their base was deeper in the mountains, hidden in caves carved into black stone. Shari knew the place dangerous, narrow, and home. To predators even the Carrick feared. It was no wonder they had chosen it as a stronghold. The human released the man, letting him crawl away with the same warning he had given before. Fear would spread faster than blood. As the fires began to die, Shari checked the wounded among her people. The human moved among them as well, helping bind injuries and carrying supplies from the damaged huts. She noticed the way her clan looked at him, curious, cautious, but also with respect. Few outsiders had ever fought beside them, and none had done so with such skill. She began to realize that his presence could change how her people saw outsiders entirely. When the camp was secure, Shari and the human stood on the ridge again, looking toward the dark line of mountains in the distance. The air between them was heavy with unspoken agreement. They would have to go there. The raiders would not stop until they were crushed completely. And now, for the first time, Shari was certain she would not face that battle alone. The path to the mountains was long and uneven. Shari led the way through the dense forest, her senses sharp for any sign of danger. The human followed close behind, his pace steady and controlled. They spoke little, each focused on the mission. Ahead, every sound of shifting leaves or snapping branches made her tighten her grip on her blade. By midday, the ground began to rise, and the trees thinned into rocky slopes. The air grew colder, carrying the faint scent of minerals and stone. Shari pointed out claw marks on the rock signs of the native beasts that prowled these heights. The human examined them with calm interest, noting their size and direction. His lack of fear impressed her more with every step. They stopped briefly to drink from a small mountain stream. The water was icy and clear, running fast over smooth stones. As she filled her flask, Shari asked the human why he had chosen to help her clan. His answer was simple. He could not ignore a fight where innocent lives were at risk. His voice carried no pride, only certainty. She had met many who fought for glory, but this man fought because it was the only thing he knew to do. The climb grew steeper, forcing them to use their hands to pull up over jagged ridges. At one point, a loose rock tumbled from beneath Shari's foot, falling into the mist below. The human caught her arm before she could slip. His grip was strong and unshaking, and when she looked at him, she saw no sign of strain. He released her only when she found her footing again. She nodded in silent thanks. By late afternoon, they reached the base of the black stone cliffs. Narrow openings dotted the rock face entrances to the caves where the raiders were said to hide. Smoke curled faintly from one of the higher openings, blending into the gray clouds above. Shari crouched behind a boulder, studying the paths leading upward. The human joined her, his eyes narrowing as he traced the routes with his gaze. Decided to wait until nightfall before approaching. In the fading light, the shadows of the cliffs deepened, making it easier to move unseen. As darkness fell, they began their ascent. The human led this time, his hands finding hidden grips in the rock. Shari followed, her armor making only the faintest scrape against the stone. The cold air bit at her skin, but she pushed forward. Without hesitation, at the first cave entrance, they paused to listen. Faint voices echoed from within, along with the metallic clink of weapons being prepared. The human gestured for her to stay back while he slipped inside to scout, She waited, counting each heartbeat. When he returned, his expression was grim. There were more raiders than they had expected, and the tunnels were narrow, making escape impossible if they were trapped. Shari considered turning back to gather more warriors, but the human shook his head. He explained that waiting would give the raiders time to move their supplies and captives deeper into the mountains. If they struck now, they could cause chaos and force the enemy to retreat into more open ground. She weighed his words carefully, then agreed. Together, they moved into the cave's darkness. Inside, the air was thick and damp, smelling of smoke and unwashed armor. Torches flickered on the walls, casting long shadows across the stone. They moved in silence, each footstep measured. The human's eyes darted to every side passage, mapping the space in his mind. Shari kept her blade ready, the tension in her body coiled like a spring. Somewhere ahead, the sound of laughter and clashing metal grew louder. They reached a wider chamber where raiders sat around a fire, their weapons laid out on the ground. The human raised his hand, signaling her to wait. He picked up a small stone and tossed it toward a dark corner of the cave. The sound drew several raiders away from the fire, leaving their weapons unguarded. In that moment, they moved as one, silent, swift, and deadly. The first raider never saw the blade coming. The human moved like a shadow, his knife sinking deep. Before the man could cry out, Shari was already beside him, her sword flashing in the firelight as she cut down another. The raiders who had gone to investigate the noise turned back too late, finding their comrades already falling. The attack was silent at first, but then one of the raiders shouted, and chaos erupted, the chamber filled with the clash of steel and the roar of voices. Shari fought with precision, each strike aimed to end a life quickly. The human's movements were tighter, closer, his knife never wasting an inch. They covered each other naturally, one striking while the other blocked. The raiders tried to push them back, but the narrow cave left no room for numbers to matter. Every enemy had to face them head-on. A larger raider swung a heavy axe at Shari, forcing her to drop low and roll aside. The human stepped into the swing's path, catching the axe handle with both hands and twisting it from the man's grip. Before the raider could react, the human slammed the weapon's head into his chest, knocking him flat. Shari's blade finished the strike. She felt the heat of the fire on her back as more enemies pressed in. The fight spilled into a side tunnel, where the walls closed tight. Here, the human's smaller weapons gave him an advantage. He moved fast, stabbing and striking before anyone could raise a defense. Shari followed close, her armor scraping against the stone as she drove the last raider in the tunnel to the ground. The sound of boots echoed from deeper within the caves, warning them the battle was far from over. They reached another chamber, lit by a larger fire. Crates of supplies lined the walls, and several prisoners were chained near the back. The human's eyes flicked to the chains, but he held back, knowing freeing them too soon would slow their escape. Shari understood the plan without words. They would clear the chamber first, then release the captives. The raiders here were better armed, their armor heavier and their weapons sharp. The first clash was brutal. A spear grazed Shari's shoulder, cutting through the outer layer of her armor. She ignored the sting and drove her blade into her attacker's side. The human faced two at once, his knife blocking one strike while his elbow smashed into another's jaw. They worked as a unit, neither letting the other be surrounded. The prisoners watched with wide eyes, hope slowly replacing fear. When the last raider in the chamber fell, the human crossed to the captives and cut their chains. Shari guided them toward the tunnel they had cleared, giving quick instructions on how to move without making noise. The human gathered several of the supply crates, checking their contents. Weapons, rations, and medical kits, resources that could help her clan rebuild. He loaded what he could carry without slowing them down. They started back toward the cave entrance, the freed prisoners moving in a line between them. Shari's ears caught the sound of pursuit. More raiders were coming, drawn by the noise of battle. The human set a crate down in the tunnel and smashed open a jar inside. The smell of oil filled the air. He lit a torch from the wall and dropped it into the crate. Flames burst upward, filling the passage with heat and smoke, cutting off the path behind them. The last stretch to the entrance was steep, the cold night air visible ahead. The human took the lead, helping each prisoner over a sharp ridge of rock. Shari stayed at the back, her blade ready in case any raider broke through the smoke. By the time they emerged into the open, the stars were bright overhead, and the wind carried the clean scent of the mountains. The captives collapsed in relief, but she knew the fight was not yet done. From their position on the mountainside, Shari could see torches moving inside the caves. The raiders would regroup, and when they did, they would come hunting. She turned to the human, meeting his eyes in the pale light. There was no fear in his gaze, only the same determination she felt. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The freed prisoners were led down the mountain path under the cover of darkness. Shari moved at the front, guiding them through safe routes she had learned over years of hunting. The human stayed at the rear, his eyes scanning for movement among the rocks. Every few steps he glanced back toward the caves, knowing the raiders would not give up easily. The cold wind carried the faint sound of drums from deep within the mountains. They reached a sheltered grove where the trees grew thick enough to hide them from above. Here, the prisoners could rest for a short time before continuing toward safer ground. Shari kept her voice low as she spoke to her people, telling them to stay alert and ready to move. The human knelt near the edge of the grove, using a shard of stone to draw a rough map in the dirt. He marked the raider stronghold, their escape route, and a new position for an ambush. Shari watched his work, noting how precise his plan was. He was not thinking only of escape, he was already preparing for the next strike. When she asked why, he explained that letting the raiders recover would only lead to more attacks. To truly end the threat, they had to make the raiders fear leaving their caves again. His tone was calm, but there was a steel in it that made her believe him without question. Before they could finish the plan, movement in the darkness caught her attention. A small group of raiders had followed them, moving carefully to avoid noise. Shari signaled to the human, and without a word, they shifted into position. The human moved low through the grass, circling to the side, while she prepared to meet them head-on. The first raider stepped into the grove, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. The fight that followed was quick and brutal. Shari's blade met the first raider's weapon with a ringing clash. She pushed forward, forcing him back, while the human struck from the shadows, taking down another before he could cry out. The remaining two tried to flee, but Shari was faster, cutting one down as the human brought the last to the ground. None of them would return to warn the others. When the grove was silent again, the prisoners looked at them with a mix of awe and relief. The human returned to his map, adjusting their route to avoid any more patrols. Shari crouched beside him, adding details of the terrain only she knew. The plan became sharper, more dangerous, and yet more possible. She realized that together they had a chance to do more than survive. They could win. They moved before dawn, using the mist to hide. Their approach to a ridge overlooking the caves. From here, they could see the main entrance, guarded by fewer raiders than expected. Shari guessed that most were inside, preparing to hunt them. The human pointed to a series of boulders above the entrance, balanced on a narrow shelf. With the right push, they could seal the entrance long enough to trap the raiders inside. The climb to the boulders was slow and dangerous. Loose stones shifted under their feet, and the drop below was steep. Shari took the lead this time, testing each foothold before signaling for the human to follow. When they reached the top, they worked together to wedge a thick branch under the largest boulder. The human strength and her precision made the stone shift inch by inch until it was ready to fall. They waited until the sound of drums grew louder from inside the caves. This was the signal that the raiders were gathering for the hunt. The human gave a final push, and the boulder rolled forward, smashing into the entrance with a thunderous crash. Smaller rocks followed, sealing the passage completely. Shari felt the ground tremble beneath her feet, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself a thin smile. From their vantage point, they could hear the shouts of confusion and anger, echoing from behind the blocked entrance. The raiders were trapped, at least for now. Shari turned to the human, knowing this would not end the war entirely, but it was a strike that would give her people the advantage they needed. His eyes met hers, and no words were necessary. The next move would be theirs to make, the dust from the rock slide still hung in the air as Shari and the human moved back from the ridge. Below them, the raiders pounded against the blocked entrance, their shouts growing weaker as the stone held. The human watched for any sign of movement from side tunnels but saw none. For now, the mountain itself had become their ally. Shari felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, though her grip on her blade never loosened. They descended carefully, avoiding loose rocks that could give away their position. The prisoners and warriors they had freed were waiting in the grove below, watching the ridge with hopeful eyes. Shari stepped forward to tell them the entrance was sealed. A murmur of relief passed through the group. The human stayed silent, scanning the trees beyond the grove. He knew the raiders could still find other ways out if given enough time. Shari spoke to her people about returning to the clan's main camp. The supplies they had taken would help rebuild, and the freed warriors would strengthen their defenses. The human listened quietly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the map in his mind. When she finished, he told her he would stay for a time, to make sure the raiders did not return too quickly. His voice carried no doubt, only certainty. They began the long journey back through the forest, moving cautiously to avoid being tracked. The human walked at the rear again, his senses sharp for danger. Shari found herself glancing back at him often, noting the way he moved with purpose in every step. She had fought beside many warriors, but none had given her the same unshakable sense that the battle was never truly over. It made her feel both uneasy and secure at the same time. By the time they reached the clan's main camp, the sun was low in the sky, painting the horizon in shades of gold and red. The camp's guards greeted them with open relief, helping the freed prisoners inside. Shari watched as the human set down the supplies, then stepped aside, letting her people speak to him. They asked questions, offered thanks, and studied him, as if trying to understand what kind of man had fought beside them. Later that night, a fire burned in the center of the camp. Warriors sat in a circle, sharing food and stories of the battle. Shari sat beside the human, feeling the warmth of the flames and the quiet weight of his presence. She told him that when they first met, she had thought of him as prey, something to be hunted or tested. Now she knew better. He was a predator in his own right, one who did not need to prove it with words. The human replied simply that strength was not about who could kill the fastest, but who could protect what mattered. Shari considered his words for a long moment, then nodded. She understood now that his kind did not hunt for dominance alone. They hunted for survival, for the safety of others, and for the certainty that no one could take what they swore to defend. It was a kind of strength she had never known before. In the days that followed, the camp began to heal. Damaged huts were rebuilt, and the freed prisoners took up roles among the warriors. The human helped without being asked, carrying heavy loads, repairing weapons, and teaching simple but effective fighting techniques. Shari saw the younger warriors watching him closely, their movements slowly copying his precision. Without realizing it, he had begun to shape the clan in subtle ways. When the time came for him to leave, Shari met him at the camp's edge. She told him that the mountains would always be dangerous, but now they would no longer be ruled by Fear. The human nodded, adjusting the strap of his pack. For a moment, they stood in silence, the forest sounds around them the only witness. She told him he had changed the way she saw not just him, but all of his kind. He gave a small, knowing smile, then turned toward the path that led out of the forest. Shari watched until he disappeared into the mist. She knew the raiders would remember his face as clearly as she did, and that memory alone would make them hesitate before striking again. For the first time since she had claimed herself the apex predator of Vera Prime, she understood she might share that title, and she was not afraid of it.